Welcome back to the deep dive. Have you ever paused to truly wonder what makes you you? What are the hidden drivers behind your decisions, your automatic reactions, your entire unique outlook on the world? It's a pretty universal human desire, isn't it? This deep-seated need to understand ourselves and, by extension, to better understand the fascinating, sometimes baffling people around us. Today, we're diving headfirst into the intriguing world of personality assessments. Now, you've probably encountered them. Maybe it was a fun, quick online quiz that told you which fictional character you are, or perhaps a more serious instrument used in a professional setting for team building or career guidance. But what are these tools, really? How do they actually work under the hood? And maybe most importantly, can we truly trust what they tell us about ourselves and others? Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to cut through some of the noise surrounding these popular models, reveal their core insights, and crucially, arm you with the tools to critically evaluate what they offer. We want to give you those aha moments without, the information overload.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here is precisely how these different personality models offer unique lenses into the human psyche. They each provide a distinct framework, a different map, really, for looking at what motivates us and how we behave. We're going to define these different approaches, explain how they attempt to categorize or describe our behaviors, and offer practical tips for navigating their complexities. And of course, we'll be introducing some key new vocabulary along the way to help you speak the language of personality science. Should be interesting. That's where we're. The quest for self-understanding. Introducing personality models.
So let's kick things off with a big question. Why do we as humans have this seemingly innate impulse to categorize ourselves and others? I mean, from ancient philosophies to modern psychology, we're constantly trying to sort, understand, and even predict. It's not just about self-awareness, is it? It's also about making sense of our social interactions, trying to figure out why some people just click and others, well, maybe not so much. This drive to put labels on ourselves and others, it often comes from a very human place of seeking clarity and predictability in a wonderfully complex world.
Exactly. Yeah, we like patterns. We like understanding. And this ancient quest has led to the development of numerous models, each with its own focus and methodology, its own way of drawing those maps we talked about. Today, we're going to primarily explore three of the most prominent ones that you're most likely to encounter. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, often just called the MBTI,
Right.
the Big Five Personality Traits, also known as the Five-Factor Model, or FFM, and the Enneagram, which delves much deeper into core motivations and inner workings. A bit different, that one. We'll also briefly touch on a couple of others like the iSync Personality Inventory and the DIC Profile, just to give you a broader sense of the landscape. But it's crucial to remember each of these offers a different framework, serves a different purpose, and comes with its own set of strengths and, importantly, points of critique.
Got it. So, different tools for different jobs, maybe?
Sort of, yeah. Understanding these distinctions is key to using them effectively and, with proper caution. 2, deep dive into the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI.
Okay, so let's start our deep dive into the models themselves. First up, one of the most widely recognized names in personality, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator.
Yeah.
Most people have probably at least heard of it or even taken a version of the test online somewhere. But what exactly is it?
Well, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, is defined as a self-report inventory. Basically, you answer questions about yourself. Its main goal is to identify an individual's personality type, highlighting their inherent strength and preferences. Not judging, just identifying. Its origins are quite fascinating, really. It stems from the work of Isabel Myers and her mother, Catherine Briggs.
Mother and daughter. Interesting.
Yeah, they developed this indicator based on Carl Jung's broader theory of psychological types.
Ah, Jung. Okay.
And their motivation, interestingly enough, arose during World War II. They wanted to help people understand individual differences. They believed that if people could better understand themselves, they could find occupations that were ideally suited to their personality types.
Makes sense. Better fit, happier people.
That was the idea, that it would ultimately lead to happier and more fulfilling lives. Myers created the first pen and pencil version back in the 1940s, and they continued to refine it over the next couple of decades.
Wow, so it's been around a while. How does it actually work then? What are the core components that make up an MBTI type?
Okay, so the core of the MBTI lies in what are called dichotomies. This is a key piece of new vocabulary for us today.
Dichotomies.
Okay, a dichotomy simply refers to a division into two distinct, often opposing parts, like left or right, black or white. In the MBTI, you identify your preference between two opposing styles across 4 different pairs. Think of it like a fork in the road, where you have a dominant preference for one path over the other. Doesn't mean you never take the other path, just which one feels more natural.
So 4 pairs of choices.
Exactly. Let's explain how these four dichotomies work. First, we have extroversion E versus introversion I. This dichotomy describes how people primarily respond to and interact with the world around them, and crucially, where they draw their energy from.
Energy source. Oh.
Extroverts, often spelled extroverts, are considered outward turning. They tend to be action-oriented, enjoy frequent social interaction, and actually feel energized after spending time with other people. Think of them as recharging their batteries by being with others.
Like plugging into the crowd.
Kind of, yeah. Introverts, on the other hand, are inward turning and tend to be more thought-oriented. They enjoy deep and meaningful social interactions, but typically feel recharged and re-energized after spending time alone.
Need that quiet time.
Exactly. It's important to clarify, everyone exhibits both extroverted and introverted qualities to some degree. We all do both. But the MBTI identifies your preference, which is the way you predominantly operate, your default setting, if you like. The second dichotomy is sensing S versus intuition N. This scale looks at how people primarily gather information from the world.
How you take things in.
Precisely. People who prefer sensing pay a great deal of attention to reality, as it is focusing on facts, concrete details, and what they can directly perceive through their five senses. They often enjoy hands-on experiences, very present-focused. In contrast, those who prefer intuition focus more on patterns, impressions, and future possibilities. They're often interested in abstract theories, underlying meanings, and the big picture. We use the letter N for intuition, by the way.
Ah, to avoid confusion with I for introversion.
Yeah.
Got it.
Spot on. So, are you focused on the tangible details or the potential connections?
So it's about whether you're more grounded in the here and now, or if your mind is always jumping ahead to possibilities, like what is versus what could be.
That's a great way to put it.
Yes.
And then our third dichotomy is thinking, T, versus feeling, F, which describes how people prefer to make decisions.
Head or heart.
Pretty much sums it up. Individuals who prefer thinking tend to make decisions with their heads, prioritizing logical and reasonable choices, often focusing on objective criteria and consequences. What makes logical sense? Those who prefer feeling, however, tend to make decisions with their hearts. They consider the impact their choices will have on people and whether the decision aligns with their personal values and group harmony. How will this affect everyone involved?
Okay, makes sense. Logic versus values, roughly.
Roughly, yes. Finally, we have judging J versus perceiving P. This dichotomy indicates how people prefer to approach their outer world and structure their lives.
Structure versus flexibility.
That's the essence. Judgers generally appreciate structure, order, and planning. They like things decided and organized and often dislike last-minute changes. They like closure. Perceivers, conversely, appreciate flexibility and spontaneity. They prefer to leave things open, allowing for adaptability and the option to change their minds as new information comes in. They like keeping options open. The MBTI explains that this judging-perceiving scale helps to describe whether you behave more like an extrovert when you are taking in new information, that's the SN part, or when you are making decisions, the TF part. It's about how you orient to the outer world.
Okay, that's a lot to take in. So you answer a series of questions, maybe those forced choice ones you mentioned, and you get a 4-letter code, like my friend who's an ENFJ. How do these 4 preferences combine to create the 16 types?
Exactly. Based on your answers to those forced choice questions, meaning you must choose between 2 given options, even if both feel a bit like you. Sometimes you are identified with a 4-letter code, such as INTJ or ENFP. There are 16 possible combinations, each representing a unique personality type. For instance, an ISTJ is often called the inspector. They're typically described as reserved, practical, loyal, orderly, and traditional. Very dependable. An ENTP, sometimes called the debater, is described as highly inventive, loves exploring ideas, and might tend to start many projects, but maybe struggle to finish them all. Full of enthusiasm, you know.
I think I know a few of those.
Right. But it's really important to understand that the MBTI asserts no one personality type is best or better than another. That's fundamental. It's not a tool for diagnosing dysfunction or abnormality. Its goal is simply to help you learn more about yourself. It's about preferences, not skills or pathology.
That's a crucial point. So thinking about tips for using it, how can understanding your MBTI type actually help someone?
Well, understanding your MBTI type can provide several useful insights for self-understanding and interaction. That's the main application. It can illuminate your own likes, dislikes, strengths, and even potential blind spots or areas for development. It can also suggest possible career preferences where your natural inclinations might thrive. It doesn't dictate your career, but might suggest environments you'd find more comfortable or stimulating. And it can even offer insights into compatibility with others in relationships, understanding differences in communication style, for example.
Yeah, I can see how that would be useful in teams too.
Absolutely. In group situations, whether at school or at work, recognizing your own strengths and understanding those of your teammates can be incredibly helpful. For example, if you know someone is a strong judger, okay, Shay, you might rely on them for detailed planning and keeping things on track. If someone's an intuitive N, maybe they're great for brainstorming future possibilities. This understanding can help groups better assign tasks and work more effectively together towards shared goals. It gives you a language to talk about differences constructively.
That makes a lot of sense for team dynamics. So how is MBTI different from other tests out there? You said it's not really a test.
Right. A key distinction of the MBTI from many other assessments is that it's not really a test in the traditional sense, because there are no right or wrong answers. There's no score, no pass-fail. And unlike many other psychological evaluations, your results are not compared against norms, meaning your score isn't measured against how other people did. There's no average baseline you're compared to. Instead, the instrument's goal is simply to offer further information about your unique self. It aims to help you understand your natural inclinations, not to judge them or compare you to others. It's about self-discovery. 3. Unpacking the Big Five personality traits, FFM.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. We're moving from a categorical system like the MBTI, which sorts you into one of 16 boxes, right, to one based on a spectrum of traits. Let's unpack the Big Five. This model often feels like it gives us a more nuanced view of personality, seeing traits as more of a continuous scale rather than just an either. Is that fair?
That's a very fair description, yes. The Big Five, often called the Five-Factor Model, or FFM, is defined as a widely used scientific model that describes how personality traits differ across individuals, using 5 broad dimensions. And unlike the MBTI's dichotomies, these are seen as continuous spectra. You're not either an extrovert or an introvert. You fall somewhere along the spectrum of extroversion. Everyone does.
Okay, so it's more about degrees. Where did this one come from?
Its origins are rooted in empirical research, specifically into natural language data. This is often called the lexical hypothesis.
Lexical, like words.
Exactly. Researchers looked at the adjectives people naturally use in everyday language to describe themselves and others. Things like friendly, organized, anxious, creative. Through statistical analysis, specifically factor analysis, they found consistent correlations. Certain groups of adjectives tended to cluster together. For example, if someone was described as conscientious, they were also more likely to be described as always prepared, organized, reliable, and less likely to be called messy or careless. So this model emerged from attempts to find the fundamental factors, the core dimensions, that explain most of the variation in human personality and temperament based on how we actually talk about people.
Fascinating. So it came out of the language we use.
Largely, yes. And the history of the Big Five traces back a surprisingly long way. There were early conjectures, even back in the 1930s, by people like William McDougall. But the initial model, the one that really started it, was advanced in 1958 by research psychologists Ernest Tupes and Raymond Crystal working with Air Force data, believe it or not.
Wow, Air Force.
Yep. But their work didn't gain widespread attention until the 1980s, when researchers like J.M. Digman and Louis Goldberg further elevated its prominence in the academic world. We should also mention Hans Eysenck's earlier work. He had already identified neuroticism and extraversion as key dimensions in his own model, and that definitely contributed to the foundation of the Big Five.
Right, so building blocks.
Exactly. The model continued to evolve. A key development was the NEOPI assessment, which initially looked at neuroticism, extraversion, and openness. Then the revised version, the NEOPIR, came out in 1992. That's when it really solidified the common factor names we use today by adding agreeableness and conscientiousness to those first 3. So ocean or canoe, depending on how you remember it.
Ocean. Okay, I can remember that.
Yeah.
So let's get into those 5 factors. How do they work, and what do they tell us about ourselves?
Absolutely. Let's detail these 5 factors. We'll introduce some more key vocabulary here and explain how each functions as a spectrum. Remember, it's about where you fall on the scale. First, openness to experience, O, sometimes just called openness. This factor measures things like creativity, curiosity, intellectual interest, and a willingness to entertain new ideas, new experiences.
Adventurous mind.
That's a good way to think about it. People high in openness tend to have a rich vocabulary. vivid imaginations, enjoy abstract ideas. They might be described as unconventional, quick to understand new concepts, and spend time reflecting. On the lower end of the spectrum, individuals might be described as more conventional, down-to-earth, practical, perhaps having difficulty understanding abstract ideas or just not being that interested in them, preferring the familiar. A sample item you might see on a questionnaire to measure this includes something like, I have a vivid imagination, or maybe a reversed one like, I have difficulty understanding abstract ideas.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next? C.
C is for conscientiousness. C. This dimension assesses characteristics like self-discipline, dutifulness, organization, striving for achievement, and impulse control. Think competence and orderliness. Highly conscientious individuals are often perceived as organized, reliable, focused, always prepared. They meticulously follow a schedule, pay attention to details, and are often exacting in their work. They get things done. Those with low conscientiousness might be more flexible and spontaneous, which can be good, but they can also appear sloppy, unreliable, easily distracted, or maybe prone to shirking duties. Less organized. A sample item here could be, I am always prepared, or maybe I follow a schedule. A reverse one might be, I shirk my duties.
So if you're wondering what one trait might best predict success in almost any job, conscientiousness is often it, right? Heard that before. It's truly the hidden engine of achievement, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's consistently one of the strongest predictors across many domains, especially work and academics. It's that diligence factor. Third, extraversion, E. Similar to the MBTI concept, but on a spectrum. This factor is characterized by boldness, energy, sociability, assertiveness, and a general engagement with the external world. Extroverts enjoy interacting with people, are often energetic, talkative, and assert themselves in groups. They often seek out stimulation. They might be described as the life of the party and feel comfortable around people.
So high energy, outward focus.
Yeah. On the other side, introverts have lower social engagement and energy levels in social settings. They tend to be quiet, reserved, perhaps more independent. They need less external stimulation. Importantly, their lack of social involvement isn't necessarily shyness or depression, but often a greater independence from the social world or a preference for less intense interaction. A sample item is, I am the life of the party, or I start conversations. A reversed one might be, I keep in the background.
Okay, so OCE, next is A.
A is for agreeableness. A. This measures a general concern for social harmony. How important is getting along with others to you? Agreeable individuals value cooperation and getting along. They're typically considerate, kind, generous, trusting, helpful, and willing to compromise. They often have an optimistic view of human nature, team players. Disagreeable individuals on the lower end tend to prioritize self-interest over getting along. They might be less concerned with others' well-being, sometimes appearing suspicious, unfriendly, critical, or competitive. More skeptical, maybe. A sample item is, I sympathize with others' feelings, or I make people feel at ease. A reversed one could be something like, I insult people.
Hopefully not many people agree strongly with that one.
Let's hope not. And finally, the fifth factor, neuroticism, N. This trait reflects a tendency to experience strong negative emotions, such as anger, anxiety, depression, vulnerability.
So emotional reactivity.
Exactly. It's sometimes called emotional instability, or its opposite, emotional stability, when the scale is reversed. Individuals high in neuroticism are emotionally reactive and more vulnerable to stress. They might interpret ordinary situations as threatening, worry a lot, get stressed easily, and feel insecure. Their negative emotional reactions might also tend to last for unusually long periods, meaning they can often find themselves in a bad mood. This can make decision-making and coping with stress more difficult. Low neuroticism means more emotional stability and resilience.
Those 5 factors, openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, ocean, they really do seem to cover a lot of ground. And I know you mentioned they're not just broad categories, but can be broken down even further.
Yes, exactly. That's an important nuance. Beyond these broad domains, the Big Five can be divided into more specific subfactors or aspects. This is another useful piece of new vocabulary. For instance, openness to experience isn't just one thing. It can be broken down into aspects like intellect, like in complex ideas, and openness itself, appreciation for art, beauty, novelty. Similarly, neuroticism can be divided into aspects like volatility, getting upset easily, and withdrawal, tendency towards depression and anxiety. These aspects offer a more granular, detailed understanding of personality within each broad factor. It adds richness to the picture.
So it's layers within layers.
Kind of. And the Big Five model also delves into biological and developmental factors, which is fascinating. Twin studies, for example, have been instrumental. They consistently suggest that both genetics and environmental factors influence all five factors. There's a definite heritability. This research highlights the genetic component, for instance. Openness to experience is estimated to have about a 57% genetic influence, extroversion around 54%, conscientiousness 49%, neuroticism 48%, and agreeableness 42%. So genes play a role, but environment matters too.
Wow, almost half or more genetic for most of them.
It's significant, yeah. And interestingly, markers for the big five personality traits have even been assessed in some non-human species,
Really? Like what?
like chimpanzees. Studies found factors that look a lot like extroversion, conscientiousness, and agreeableness in chimps. Other species showed traits related to extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, and even openness. It suggests these might be pretty fundamental dimensions of mammalian temperament.
That's wild. What about how these traits develop in humans? Are we born this way or do they change?
Well, evidence suggests these traits are evident pretty early, even from preschool age through adulthood. Four traits: extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, and agreeableness reliably describe differences even in childhood. Openness might manifest a bit later. Now, here's the interesting part about change. Personality tends to stabilize in adulthood, meaning your relative ranking compared to others stays fairly consistent. If you're more extroverted than your friends at 30, you probably will be at 52. However, mean-level changes do occur across the population as people age. This is a phenomenon known as the maturation effect. Maturation effect. Like we mellow out. In some ways, yes. It suggests our personality isn't completely set in stone. For instance, many people find they naturally become a bit more agreeable, more conscientious, maybe more patient and organized as they move through adulthood. That's the maturation effect at play. On average, agreeableness and conscientiousness tend to increase over time, while extroversion, neuroticism, and openness tend to decrease slightly. We evolve beyond our early tendencies.
That's actually quite hopeful, isn't it? We're not stuck. So, what's the broader impact and relevance of the Big Five then? If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see its applicability across many domains. What are some of the most surprising or impactful ways these traits manifest in our lives?
Well, the reach is pretty wide. Let's look at a few key areas. Culturally, the five-factor model holds up remarkably well across diverse cultures and languages. German, Chinese, South Asian studies show similar structures. This suggests that these core five dimensions are quite universal, although how they are expressed might vary culturally. For example, openness sometimes looks a bit different, or is less strongly supported in some Asian cultures compared to Western ones. There are even interesting correlations with broader cultural factors, like individualism tending to correlate with higher average extroversion in a culture.
Interesting. What about health?
Huge implications in health. Changes in personality traits, like a significant decrease in conscientiousness or extroversion, or an increase in neuroticism, have been observed in people developing conditions like dementia, and can even assist in early diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Common mental disorders are also empirically linked to these traits. High neuroticism is a major risk factor for things like anxiety and depression. Low conscientiousness is also often implicated. Low extroversion can be linked to depression too. Substance use disorders often show links to low agreeableness and low conscientiousness. There are actually several models linking personality and psychopathology. For instance, the vulnerability risk model proposes that certain personality traits, like high neuroticism, literally make you more susceptible, more vulnerable to developing mental health challenges if you encounter stress. It's a powerful connection.
Wow, that really highlights the link between personality and well-being. What about education?
Yeah, personality plays an important role there too. Conscientiousness and agreeableness, for example, positively relate to various effective learning styles and academic performance, including GPA.
Makes sense, being organized and cooperative helps you learn.
Exactly. If you're highly conscientious, you're more likely to study effectively, turn work in on time, and achieve better grades. Openness and extroversion can also relate to how deeply you process information. Neuroticism, unsurprisingly, tends to negatively impact academic outcomes.
And employment. You mentioned conscientiousness earlier.
Yes, for employment, understanding personality is crucial for job fit and performance. Conscientiousness is a strong predictor of success across almost all jobs. Agreeableness is also generally important for teamwork and positive interactions. Openness can be linked to things like proactivity and training performance. Agreeableness, while good for well-being at work, interestingly, is sometimes linked to potentially lower income, perhaps due to being less competitive in salary negotiations.
Huh, that's a surprising wrinkle.
It is. And in the context of remote work, which is so common now, Research suggests conscientiousness and openness are positively correlated with willingness to work remotely and productivity in that setting. Extroversion can actually correlate negatively sometimes.
Why is that?
While some extroverts might struggle more with the potential social isolation or lack of constant interaction in remote settings, neuroticism is also linked to higher burnout risk when working remotely. So, personality matters even for where you work effectively.
Fascinating. And relationships.
Yes, definitely. In romantic relationships, studies consistently show that lower neuroticism, being more emotionally stable, and higher agreeableness and conscientiousness in partners are associated with higher relationship quality and satisfaction.
Stable, kind, and reliable partners make for happier relationships. Shocking.
Exactly. Not exactly earth-shattering, but the data backs it up. Extroversion can be linked to things like feeling more committed. And interestingly, relationships themselves can drive personality development, especially in young adults. Being in a stable, supportive relationship can actually lead to decreases in neuroticism and increases in conscientiousness and agreeableness over time.
So our relationships can literally help shape our personality.
It seems so. It really highlights how dynamic we are as individuals. Even our underlying personality can shift through significant life experiences like long-term relationships. Fourthly, exploring the Enneagram, beyond traits to core motivations.
Okay, now let's pivot. We've looked at MBTI's preferences and the Big Five's trait spectrums. Now let's explore a model that really tries to get at the why behind our behaviors, often tracing back to foundational experiences, maybe even childhood stuff. The Enneagram. It feels like a very different kind of system compared to the others, which seem more focused on observable traits or preferences. The Enneagram seems to dig deeper into our core motivations, our fears, our desires. Is that right?
It absolutely does. That's a great way to characterize it. The Enneagram is defined as a model of the human psyche, primarily understood as a typology of 9 interconnected personality types. Its fundamental concept is deeply rooted in how limiting subconscious beliefs, often developed in early childhood, shape our core type. Think about messages you might have received or maybe didn't receive as a child. Things like, it's not okay to make mistakes, or you must be strong, or you are wanted if you meet others' needs. These messages, or the lack of essential affirming messages, can shape distorted perceptions of reality that contribute to the fixation of our core Enneagram type. Each person is understood to have one primary type, which forms a central axis of their personality structure and defense mechanisms.
So it's really about those deep-seated patterns. How does it actually work then? It's not just about picking one of 9 numbers, is it? I know there are things like wings and arrows, lines on the diagram.
You're right, it's quite layered and dynamic, much more than just 9 boxes. Let's explain how the Enneagram works by looking at its core components and introducing some more important new vocabulary. So yes, everyone is said to have one primary or core type out of the 9. That's your home base. But then each type has wings. These are the types numerically adjacent to your core type on the Enneagram symbol.
The ones next door.
Exactly. For example, if you're a type 4, your potential wings are type 3 and type 5. You'd identify as either a 4W5, 4 with a 5 wing, or a 4W3, 4 with a 3 wing. You can't be a 4W9 because 9 isn't directly adjacent on the circle. Your wings influence your core type, adding nuances or flavors. Typically, one wing will resonate more strongly or be more dominant than the other, though you can access both. It's like having a primary color blended with a secondary one.
Okay, core type plus a wing flavor. What about the lines inside the symbol, the arrows?
Ah, yes, those are crucial. They represent the directions of growth, integration, and stress, disintegration. This is really key new vocabulary for the Enneagram and shows its dynamism. The Enneagram symbol isn't static, it shows movement. The lines connecting the types indicate these directions. When you are under significant stress, feeling overwhelmed or unhealthy, you tend to move against the arrow in your direction of disintegration. You unconsciously take on some of the less healthy or more average characteristics of that connected type. For example, a driven, image-conscious type 3, when stressed and feeling like a failure, might become disengaged, apathetic, and shut down, sort of like an unhealthy type 9.
Okay, so stress makes you act like the less healthy side of another type.
In a sense, yes. Conversely, when you are growing, feeling secure, and becoming more self-aware, integrating, you move with the arrow in your direction of integration or growth. You consciously access the healthier or higher qualities of that connected type. So that same type 3, when growing and becoming more authentic, might become more cooperative, committed to others, and less concerned with image, accessing the healthy qualities of type 6.
So growth involves borrowing the strengths of another type.
It's more nuanced than borrowing or imitation. It's important to emphasize that integration isn't about suddenly trying to act like another type, for instance. A powerful type 8, suddenly trying to act like a type 2 by being overly solicitous, isn't true integration. Instead, integration is a process of consciously letting go of the limiting fixations and defensive aspects of your own type. This allows the higher qualities of the integration point type to naturally emerge within you. For example, a type 5, who tends to withdraw into their mind and hoard resources, integrates not by acting like an 8, but by connecting more with their body, their vitality, their gut instincts like a healthy 8 does, rather than just intellectualizing everything. It's about becoming more whole within your own journey.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about internal growth and loosening the grip of your type's main strategy, not just mimicking someone else. Okay, so for someone interested in figuring out their type, what are some good tips for typing yourself? This seems harder than maybe MBTI or Big Five.
It often is, because it requires more self-reflection on motivations, not just behaviors. So for those looking for tips on typing yourself, most experienced Enneagram practitioners offer similar advice. The number one tip is usually to read extensively about each of the 9 types. Don't just rely on short descriptions. You'll often find your core type resonates deeply, sometimes through a sense of uncomfortable recognition, maybe even a little shame or embarrassment at the underlying motivation or fear it reveals. That ouch moment can be telling.
So lean into the discomfort sometimes.
Sometimes, yes. Now, online tests, they are rarely completely accurate for the Enneagram because they often focus too much on behavior rather than core motivation. However, they can be a helpful starting point. A common tip is to take 1 or 2 different well-regarded tests and then read deeply about your top 3 or 4 results. Don't just accept the first result. Some people find tests like the Eclectic Energies test online to be more accurate than others, but always supplement with reading. There are also excellent resources specifically designed to help with common misidentifications, like distinguishing between type 4 and type 9 or type 6 and type 1 if you're feeling stuck between a few types.
Okay, tests is a starting point, but reading is key. Any other tips?
Absolutely. Another valuable tip for self-typing is to explore the unconscious childhood messages, lost childhood messages, and basic desires and their corresponding basic fears and distortions associated with each type. These are vital pieces of new vocabulary and concepts within the Enneagram framework. For example, a type 1, the reformer perfectionist, might have an unconscious childhood message like, it's not okay to make mistakes. Their lost childhood message might be, you are good, something they long to hear. Their basic desire is to have integrity and be good, but this can distort into critical perfectionism, driven by a basic fear of being corrupt or evil.
Wow, that's deep.
It is, and often when you read these for all 9 types, only 1 or 2 sets of these core motivations, fears, and messages will deeply resonate and feel like yours. If you're still confused after all this,
All right.
a powerful exercise recommended in the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, is to write a detailed, objective biography of your entire life, but write it in the third person, as if describing someone else.
That sounds challenging.
It can be, but it helps create distance. Reflect on your consistent patterns of behavior, your reactions, your motivations in various situations across your life. It's often recommended to do this before taking any tests, actually, to avoid confirmation bias.
That sounds like a really introspective, almost therapeutic process.
Yeah.
Okay, once you think you understand your core type, how do you dig even deeper into this model? You mentioned it's layered.
Right. Once you've got a good handle on your core type and you understand how your wings and those directions of growth and stress influence you, there are even deeper elements of the Enneagram designed for personal development and richer understanding. Let's explore these, introducing more key new vocabulary. First, there are the 3 triads, also called centers of intelligence. These group the 9 types into 3 sets of 3, based on their core emotional imbalance, or the center gut, heart, or head that is most distorted or dominant.
Gut, heart, head. Okay.
The instinctive triad or gut center includes types 8, 9, and 1. These types primarily carry and manage issues related to rage or anger. Their core problems revolve around aggression and repression, and they're fundamentally concerned with resisting or controlling reality based on instinct. The feeling triad or heart center includes types 2, 3, and 4. These types carry issues related to shame. Their ego defenses revolve around managing their self-image and understanding their identity. They are fundamentally concerned with their image and how others see them. The thinking triad or head center includes types 5, 6, and 7. These types carry issues related to fear or anxiety. Their core problems center on finding safety and security in the world, and they try to manage anxiety through thinking, planning, or escaping.
Rage, shame, fear. That's powerful. So everyone feels those, but each triad struggles most with one.
Exactly. And it's important to clarify that the triads represent the emotion that the ego structure is most organized around defending against, not necessarily the emotion most consciously felt. For example, a type 3 might not consciously feel a lot of shame, but their entire personality structure, the drive for success and image, is built to avoid feeling worthless or shameful. So understanding these core emotional drivers, the underlying rage for the gut types, the shame for the heart types, and the fear for the head types can be a profound unlock. It reveals the why behind your deepest reactions, even if you don't always consciously feel that specific emotion.
That adds a whole other dimension. Are there other groupings?
Yes, there are also harmonic groups. This is another way of grouping the types, this time by how they tend to respond when they don't get what they want, or how they cope with problems and conflict. For example, the reactive group includes types 6, 4, and 8. When faced with a problem, these types react strongly, emotionally, and they really need a response or reaction from others to know where they stand. Think of the type 8 who gets angry and needs to assert control, or the type 6 who gets anxious and needs reassurance, or the type 4 who withdraws into intense feeling and needs to be understood.
Reactive. Okay. What else?
There's also the competency group, types 1, 3, 5, who tend to cut off feelings and solve problems logically, and the positive outlook group, types 2, 7, 9, who tend to reframe negatives and deny they have problems. These offer another lens on coping styles.
Fascinating. What about instincts? I've heard about that too.
Yes, the instinctual variants or subtypes. This is another crucial layer, adding significant depth. This theory posits that in addition to our core type, one of three basic biological instincts, self-preservation, SP, social, SO, or sexual, SX, sometimes called one-to-one, became most distorted or prioritized in childhood due to early experiences. This dominant instinct shapes our preoccupations, where our attention naturally goes and drives a lot of our behavior. It creates 27 distinct subtypes, 9 types by 3 instincts.
So it's like another filter on your core type.
Exactly. It really changes the flavor. For example, a self-preservation type 5 might be focused on conserving energy and resources, while a social type 5 might be more focused on finding their niche within groups through knowledge, and a sexual type 5 might seek intense connection through deep, shared intellectual pursuits. Understanding your instinctual variant is considered pivotal, especially in relationships, as sharing the same dominant instinct with a partner often means sharing core values and priorities, which can lead to easier understanding. And just to clarify, the sexual variant isn't purely about sex, it's about a drive for intensity, connection, and attraction in relationships and experiences.
Okay. Core type, wing, instinct. Anything else?
There are also the levels of development. This adds a vertical dimension to the Enneagram, measuring your degree of psychological health, freedom, and awareness from your personality's automatic structures and defenses. Each type has a continuum, ranging from healthy, levels 1-3, high functioning, embodying the virtues of the type, through average, levels 4-6, where most normal behaviors and neuroses reside, down to unhealthy, levels 7-9, increasingly dysfunctional and potentially pathological. It's vital to remember that your level of development isn't just about your mood on a given day. It reflects your overall level of self-awareness, presence, and freedom from your type's ego fixation. You can move up and down these levels over time.
So it shows potential for growth within your type.
Precisely. And finally, briefly, there's the concept of tri-types. This is a more recent and sometimes debated theory suggesting that, along with your main core type from one triad, you also have a preferred type within the other two triads, forming a 3-type archetype. For example, someone might identify with type 5, head, type 4, heart, and type 8, leading to a 548 tri-type, sometimes called the scholar. The debate is whether this contradicts core Enneagram theory or provides a more robust understanding.
Sounds complex.
It is. The general advice is usually to really master your understanding of your core type, wings, instincts, and levels first, before delving too deep into tri-type theory, as it's meant for even more nuanced exploration.
Okay, so summing up the Enneagram, overarching thoughts, and maybe some final growth tips.
Sure. The key takeaway is that the Enneagram is positioned primarily as a powerful tool for self-discovery, self-awareness, and ultimately psychological and spiritual transformation. While we have one core type that shapes our main lens on the world, the model suggests we actually contain parts of all 9 types within us. All their fears, motivations, and desires exist in us to some degree. Remember, integration, moving towards your growth point, isn't about imitating another type's behavior. It's about consciously observing and letting go of the automatic patterns and blocks within your own type. That's what allows the higher qualities, the virtues, to emerge. And working with the Enneagram over time can help you unlock these payoffs of practice, the characteristic virtues associated with the healthy expression of each type qualities like patience and serenity for a type 1, authenticity and value for a type 3, non-attachment and trust for a type 5, magnanimity and innocence for a type 8, or vitality and right action for a type 9. Resources like the book The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Riso and Hudson are highly recommended for digging deeper. And a final tip, while it's incredibly natural once you learn the system to start trying to type everyone you know.
Guilty.
We all do it. But it's important to remember the Enneagram is primarily a tool for your own self-understanding and development. Typing others can sometimes be inaccurate and even harmful if done carelessly. Focus on your own journey first. V. The ISEC Personality Inventory, EPI, and DISC, briefly mentioned.
Okay, wow. The Enneagram is really deep. Beyond these systems we've just explored in detail, MBTI, Big Five, Enneagram you mentioned, there are other noteworthy assessments out there, like the ISENC Personality Inventory. What's the quick take on that one?
Right. Briefly, the ISENC Personality Inventory, EPI, that's our new vocabulary term here, assesses an individual's personality based primarily on two key broad dimensions, which actually predate the Big Five becoming dominant, but overlap with it. These dimensions are neuroticism versus stability, similar to Big Five's N, and extraversion versus introversion, similar to Big Five's E. Isaac later added a third dimension, psychoticism, in a related questionnaire. The results of the EPI typically provide three main scores: an E score indicating your level on the extraversion-introversion scale, an N score for your level on the neuroticism stability scale, and interestingly, a lie score.
A lie score.
Yeah, it's designed to measure the extent to which a person might be trying to fake good or present themselves in a more socially desirable light when answering the questions. It checks for consistency and improbable answers. The full assessment contains 100 yes-no questions, though a shorter version with 57 questions also exists. So it's a more concise model focusing on these core temperament dimensions.
Okay. And you also mentioned DISC.
Yes, we also want to acknowledge the DISC personality test. It's another very popular assessment, especially in corporate and business settings. You see it a lot in team building workshops. While our specific sources for this deep dive didn't provide detailed information on its mechanics, specific dimensions, dominance, influence, steadiness, conscientiousness are the typical ones, or scientific backing, it's incredibly prevalent. This prevalence might be due to its perceived simplicity and its focus on observable behaviors related to work style, which, as we're about to discuss, can also make it subject to some of the broader critiques of personality profiling, particularly regarding depth and scientific validation depending on the specific version used. 6. Critical lenses. What to consider with personality profiling.
Okay, so we have MBTI, Big Five, Enneagram, EPI, DISC. With all these different models and systems designed to tell us who we are, this really brings us to a crucial question. How reliable and valid are these tools, really? How do we know if they truly help us gain insight, or if some of them are just, well, like sophisticated parlor tricks? Things that sound impressive but maybe don't actually deliver real, dependable understanding. What are the red flags we should look out for when we encounter these things?
This is such a critical point, and yes, it's absolutely essential to approach these tools with a discerning critical eye. There are several general flaws and concerns to consider with personality profiling broadly, and then specific critiques leveled against certain models. Think of these points as practical tips for how to critically evaluate any personality assessment you might encounter, whether it's for personal use or, importantly, if it's being used in a workplace or educational setting.
Okay, lay it on us. What are the general concerns?
All right, let's start with some of the overarching issues that critics often raise. First, and perhaps most significantly, there's often little strong evidential basis behind many popular personality profiling tools. And in some cases, there's actually significant scientific evidence against their efficacy or the way they are commonly used. You really want to look for independent, peer-reviewed research supporting a tool's claims, not just testimonials or the company's own marketing materials.
So show me the data.
Exactly. Show me the independent data. Second, many models, particularly simpler ones or older ones like MBTI, are based on false dichotomies. This is a crucial concept in new vocabulary. These are strict either assumptions like you're either a thinker or a feeler, either big picture or detail-oriented. There's actually very little psychological evidence that humans operate in such rigid, mutually exclusive categories.
Right, most people can be both, depending on the situation.
Precisely. Research shows people can possess and utilize seemingly opposite traits or preferences simultaneously. So if a test tells you that you can't be both, say, analytical and compassionate, or planned and spontaneous, that's your cue to be skeptical. Human personality is far too complex and context-dependent for these simplistic either boxes.
Okay, so watch out for those forced choices. What else?
Another very significant issue, especially with older or widely commercialized tests, is the potential for weird bias. This is an important term, new vocabulary again. It stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies. Many prominent psychological models and tests were developed and validated, primarily using participants from these specific cultural backgrounds. This means they might inherently reflect individualistic values and fail to recognize or adequately capture strengths, motivations, or personality structures more common in collectivist or other non-weird cultures. It limits their universal applicability and can lead to misinterpretations.
So the test itself might have a built-in cultural slant.
It's a real risk, yes. Also, these assessments rarely address the huge influence of context or interrelational dynamics on how people actually behave. They often make assumptions about your behavior based solely on individual trait scores, ignoring how situations, relationships, stress levels, or cultural norms dramatically affect how we act day to day. Relatedly, many tests tend to implicitly or explicitly assume that our personalities are largely fixed and unchangeable throughout life. This flies in the face of research, like the maturation effect we discussed with the Big Five, demonstrating that personality can and does shift and evolve over time due to age, experiences, and conscious effort.
The fixed idea seems limiting.
It can be very limiting, yes, and potentially harmful. This leads to the concern that these tools can lead to false and potentially damaging assumptions about others based on a simple label or profile. Stereotyping someone based on their supposed type can shut down real understanding. There are also serious ethical concerns about unethical or even illegal uses, particularly in recruitment, promotion, or other high-stakes decisions, sometimes made without proper consent or validation for that specific purpose. Using a test not validated for hiring to hire could potentially be discriminatory.
That's a big one for workplaces.
Huge! And sometimes these tools can be weaponized, used as a management tool to label employees, shut down further discussion, or avoid the harder work of actually understanding individual needs and complexities. Oh, well, you're just an XYZ, that's why you disagree. It can stifle genuine communication. The algorithms behind many commercial tests are often proprietary, closed-source black boxes. This means they can inherit biases from their creators, and it prevents independent researchers from analyzing exactly how they work or testing them rigorously.
So you don't know what's really going on inside.
Often, no. We mentioned gender bias earlier, the example where the Big Five was shown to potentially score women as more aggressive than men for identical answers due to flaws in the original data models used. This highlights the real danger of hidden biases in algorithms. Another tactic some proponents use to deflect criticism about poor reliability is advising people not to retake the tests. They might claim getting similar results twice shows consistency, but as critics point out, this can be misleading. Just because you consistently say your favorite color is yellow doesn't mean the favorite color test is a stable measure of your deep personality, right? Consistency alone doesn't equal meaningfulness or true stability of the underlying construct.
That favorite color analogy makes sense. Consistency isn't proof of validity.
Exactly. And finally, a point we touched on. When assigned a profile, especially in organizational settings, users are generally not allowed to dispute it. The implicit assumption is that the short test knows more about you than your decades of lived experience. Plus, the fact that some popular tests, like the MBTI, lack widespread use in academic psychology research, only exists in the business world, as one critique put it, is a significant red flag regarding their scientific credibility compared to models like the Big Five, which is heavily researched academically, even with its own critiques.
Wow, that's a lot of potential pitfalls. That last point about not being able to dispute your results is quite striking. It really makes you wonder how much these tests truly understand the complexity of a person. So how do we distinguish between a genuinely good, useful assessment and one that's maybe less reliable or even potentially problematic?
That's where understanding two fundamental concepts from psychometrics comes in: reliability and validity. These are absolutely critical concepts for evaluating any measurement tool and essential new vocabulary for anyone engaging with these tests.
Reliability and validity. Okay, break those down for us.
Sure. Reliability refers to the consistency of measurement. Does the test produce stable and consistent results over time? One key measure is test-retest reliability. If you take the same test on two different occasions, without any major life changes in between, do you get the same or very similar results? Think of it like a bathroom scale. If you step on it 3 times in a row and get wildly different weights each time, it's not reliable. A reliable test should give you consistent scores.
Okay, consistency, that's reliability. What's validity?
Validity, on the other hand, refers to accuracy. Does a test truly measure what it claims to measure? And, importantly, does it predict what it claims to predict? A test could be reliable, give consistent scores, but not valid, not actually measure the thing it's supposed to. Like our scale example. It could consistently tell you you weigh 10 pounds, which is reliable, but it's certainly not valid if you're an adult.
Okay, got it. Reliable isn't enough. It has to be accurate too.
Exactly. For personality tests used for things like hiring or development, arguably the most important type of validity is criterion validity. This assesses how accurately the test score predicts a specific relevant outcome, the criterion, such as job performance, training success, team effectiveness, or academic grades. You want solid evidence that the test results actually correlate with these real-world outcomes it's supposed to predict.
So does it actually predict job success, for example? That's criterion validity.
Precisely. Now let's look at some specific critiques using these lenses. For the MBTI, numerous independent academic studies over the years have indicated insufficient evidence for its scientific validity, especially its criterion validity. While the Myers-Briggs Foundation often claims high accuracy and test-retest reliability, other research suggests that a significant percentage of people, sometimes up to 50% in some studies, get a different four-letter type when they retake the test, even after short periods. This raises questions about its reliability. Furthermore, it's generally not found to be a strong predictor of job performance or career success. Its categorical either-or nature is often criticized by psychologists for boxing people into rigid categories, which may not accurately capture the nuance and fluidity of actual human personality and behavior.
So questions about both its consistency and its accuracy for prediction. What about the Big Five? That one seems more scientifically accepted.
It generally is, yes. The Big Five is widely influential and heavily researched in academic psychology. It tends to show better reliability and validity, particularly criterion validity for predicting certain outcomes like job performance, especially conscientiousness, or academic success. However, it still faces scrutiny. Critics question whether the five factors are truly comprehensive. Do they capture everything important about personality? There are debates about adding other factors like honesty, humility in the Hexaco model. There are also questions about its generalizability across all cultures and contexts, as we discussed with the weird bias, and concerns about the potential for oversimplification. Some critics argue that focusing only on the five broad factors loses important information contained in the more specific facets or aspects. They might say it's not nearly as powerful in predicting and explaining actual behavior as the more numerous facets or primary traits. And some argue that it essentially just replicates dimensions found in earlier temperament research rather than offering fundamentally novel insights.
So even the more scientifically grounded model has its nuances and debates.
Absolutely. No model is perfect. This actually brings us to another important distinction that sometimes comes up in these debates: the difference between personality and temperament. This is useful new vocabulary.
Okay, personality versus temperament. What's the difference?
Generally speaking, temperament refers to those early appearing, relatively stable, often biologically or genetically driven, individual differences in behavioral style and affective characteristics. Think things like emotionality, activity level, sociability aspects often evident from infancy or early childhood. Personality, in contrast, is often considered a broader, more complex psychosocial construct that develops over time through the interaction of temperament with environment, learning, and social experiences. It includes more learned and content-specific characteristics like values, attitudes, beliefs, habits, and coping strategies. Personality develops on top of temperament, you could say.
So temperament is the foundation, personality is the building.
That's a decent analogy. Critics of the Big Five sometimes point out that its core dimensions, particularly neuroticism, emotionality, and extraversion, sociability activity, overlap significantly with dimensions described in much earlier temperament research. They might argue that the model, while useful, may be capturing fundamental temperamental differences more than the fully developed personality construct in its entirety. It's a subtle but important distinction in psychological theory.
Okay, that clarifies things. So pulling all these critiques and considerations together, if you're looking at using a personality assessment, or maybe your workplace is asking you to take one, what are the key tips or questions you should ask yourself or ask them to figure out if it's a tool you can genuinely trust and if it's being used appropriately?
Excellent question. Based on the critiques and best practices, here are some concrete tips for evaluating a personality test, adapted from sources like Hogan Assessments, which emphasize a critical, evidence-based approach. First, consider job relatedness. if used for work. Does the assessment actually measure knowledge, skills, abilities, or characteristics that are truly important for success in the specific job or role in question? This should ideally be established through a formal process called job analysis, not just based on assumptions. Is it relevant? Second, demand evidence of reliability. Is the test consistent over time? Ask for documented independent evidence of its retest reliability coefficients. If it claims to measure stable enduring characteristics, it should produce consistent results over reasonable time periods. What's the proof? Third, and perhaps most crucial, insist on validity, especially criterion validity. Is it accurate? Does it demonstrably predict what it claims to predict in your specific context? Don't just accept vague claims like it improves communication. Ask for documented scientific evidence validation studies showing that the assessment scores actually correlate with meaningful outcomes like job performance, reduced turnover, or whatever the intended goal is. Where is the proof it works for this purpose? Finally, always consider the ethical implications. Remember that assessment results affect real people's lives and careers. Decisions based on these tools should be made with care, fairness, transparency, and a commitment to reducing bias. Is it being used responsibly and ethically?
Job relatedness, reliability, validity, ethics, those seem like really solid benchmarks.
They are. And ultimately, it's helpful to keep the complex human perspective in mind. We have to remember that humans are fundamentally complex adaptive systems, not merely complicated machines.
What's the difference there?
In a complicated machine, like a car engine, the parts interact in predictable ways. Pressing the accelerator always does the same thing, ideally. Cause and effect are relatively stable. But in a complex system, like a human being, an ecosystem, or even traffic, the components interact in ways that can change the system itself. Cause and effect are not always stable or predictable. Asking a teammate for help might get a yes today and a no tomorrow, depending on countless factors like their mood, their workload, your relationship history, the office culture. Everything interacts dynamically.
So people don't fit neatly into predictable boxes.
Exactly. That's why personality tests that try to box people into fixed categories or predict behavior with perfect accuracy will likely never fully capture the richness, nuance, and dynamic nature of human beings. It brings us back to that great quote, often attributed to statistician George Box: "All models are wrong. Some are useful." The utility of these personality models lies not in being perfectly accurate or definitive labels, but in their ability to provide a potentially useful lens, a framework for reflection, or a starting point for conversation if used critically and appropriately. 7. So what does this all mean? Navigating the world of personality. So if we try to synthesize all of this, connect it back to the bigger picture, what we see is this really rich, sometimes confusing landscape of tools. Each model offers its own focus, its own strengths, its own language. You have the descriptive preferences of the MBTI, useful perhaps for team understanding if not taken too literally. You have the empirically derived trait dimensions of the Big Five, valuable for research and predicting broad behavioral tendencies. And you have the deeper motivational and transformational insights offered by the Enneagram, really focused on that inner work. They each give us a different angle.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, the learner, trying to navigate this world of self-discovery and personality tools? How do you make sense of it all and apply it constructively to your own life without falling into the traps we just discussed?
That's the key question. I think when used critically, mindfully, and with a healthy dose of skepticism about their limitations, these tools could be incredibly valuable. They can certainly foster profound self-awareness. Just the process of thinking about the questions they raise. How do I get energized? How do I make decisions? What are my core fears? Can help you understand your own tendencies, strengths, and, importantly, your blind spots and areas for potential growth. They can also provide a useful, non-judgmental framework for understanding why others behave differently than you do. Recognizing someone might have a different preference, like introversion versus extroversion, or a different core motivation, like an Enneagram type sphere, can foster empathy, reduce conflict, and significantly improve communication and collaboration in all sorts of settings: work, family, relationships.
So better self-understanding and better understanding of others.
Exactly. And some models, like the Enneagram we explored, are explicitly designed for personal growth. They don't just describe you, they offer potential pathways for integration, for becoming more whole, for cultivating specific virtues or capacities that lead to greater freedom and well-being. And practically speaking, understanding your personality, your traits, preferences, motivations, again, acknowledging the limitations of the assessments can help you make more informed choices. Choices about career paths that might align better with your nature, about the kinds of relationships or environments where you thrive, or even about how you approach learning new things most effectively. And just briefly, for organizations, when valid and reliable assessments are used ethically and appropriately, they can offer benefits like identifying core competencies, potentially reducing hiring bias compared to subjective interviews alone, improving diversity and inclusion efforts if used carefully, boosting employee performance through better fit and development, and ultimately even increasing profits through more effective workforce. But the key words there are valid, reliable, ethical, and appropriate.
Right, the caveats are crucial. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe a final thought for our listeners. As you continue your journey of learning and self-discovery, grappling with these models and maybe others, perhaps the most profound insight isn't finding the perfect label or the right box to put yourself in. Maybe it's actually understanding that while these models can provide incredibly useful maps, potential starting points for exploration, the true territory of who you are is far more dynamic, far more nuanced, context-dependent, and ever-evolving than any single test or typology can ever fully capture. So maybe the question isn't just what type am I, but what new aspect of myself will I explore next, knowing that my personality isn't a fixed destination, but an ongoing, fascinating journey.
Thank you so much for joining us for this really insightful deep dive into the world of personality assessments.
It was a pleasure. We absolutely encourage you to continue your learning journey, read critically, and reflect deeply.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.